The Lone Wolf's Song. A rogue wolf musician drifts from town to town, hiding his true nature in bars and backroads. When his song awakens the dormant wolf inside a human woman, he must decide if he'll keep running, or stay and teach her how to survive. Before we begin our story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see more paranormal romance like this. Now for the Lone Wolf's Song. Chapter 1, Drifter's Blues. The guitar case hit the gravel with a dull thud as Marcus Thorne stepped off the Greyhound bus into the sweltering heat of another nameless desert town. Dust devils danced between the gas pumps and tumbleweeds, and the air shimmered like liquid glass above the asphalt. He'd been running for 3 years now, town to town, gig to gig, always moving before anyone could ask the right questions or notice the wrong things about him. Sagebrush, Nevada wasn't even a dot on most maps. Just a cluster of weathered buildings squatting beside Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America. Population maybe 300 on a good day, the kind of place where strangers were either welcomed with desperate hospitality or watched with the paranoid intensity of people who had too much time and too few distractions. Marcus slung his battered leather jacket over his shoulder and picked up the guitar case. The instrument inside was worth more than everything else he owned combined, a 1963 Martin D28 that sang like angels and cried like the damned. It was the only thing he'd kept from his old life, the only piece of who he used to be that he couldn't bear to abandon. The Moonrise Saloon sat at the far end of Main Street, its neon sign flickering weakly against the late afternoon sun. Half the letters were dark, spelling out MNISE in stuttering pink light. The parking lot was gravel and weeds, populated by pickup trucks that had seen better decades and motorcycles that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and pure stubbornness. Marcus pushed through the heavy wooden doors, and the familiar smell of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and human desperation washed over him. It was the same in every town, the same cast of characters playing out the same small tragedies. The bartender with dreams bigger than his circumstances. The regulars drowning their sorrows in amber liquid. The couples fighting in dark corners, their voices lost beneath the jukebox's mechanical wheeze. You the musician? The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She wore a black t-shirt with staff printed across the chest and had the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Marcus Thorne, he said, extending a hand she didn't take. Tommy at the booking agency said you needed someone for the weekend. Betty Kowalski. I own this place. She looked him up and down, taking in his worn jeans, scuffed boots, and the 3-day stubble that made him look older than his 32 years. You play anything besides folk music for college kids? Marcus smiled, the expression not quite reaching his dark eyes. I play whatever keeps the drinks flowing and the customers happy. Good. You're on at 9, play till midnight. $50 a night plus tips if anyone's feeling generous. She turned to go, then paused. And Thorne? This isn't the kind of place where singer-songwriters pour their hearts out about their feelings. These people come here to forget their problems, not to think about new ones. He nodded, understanding the unspoken rules. Keep it simple. Keep it familiar. Don't dig too deep or shine too bright. It was the same everywhere, people wanted their music like they wanted their beer, cold and uncomplicated. Marcus found a small table in the corner and settled in to wait, nursing a whiskey and watching the bar fill with the evening crowd. Construction workers still dusty from their shifts. A group of women celebrating someone's divorce. An older man in a sheriff's uniform who kept glancing toward the door like he was expecting trouble. But it was the woman at the end of the bar who held his attention. She sat alone, fingers wrapped around a bottle of beer she barely touched, staring at her reflection in the mirror behind the bottles of top-shelf liquor. Auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple sundress that suggested she didn't belong in a place like this. There was something about her posture, straight-backed but tense, like a rabbit that had wandered into a wolf's den and couldn't find the exit. When she turned her head, their eyes met in the mirror for just a moment. Hers were green as bottle glass, wide with an innocence that seemed almost fragile in the harsh light of the saloon. Something stirred in Marcus's chest, a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. He looked away quickly, focusing on tuning his guitar. At 9 o'clock sharp, Betty nodded toward the small stage, really just a raised platform with a microphone stand and a single spotlight that had seen better years. Marcus stepped up, adjusted the mic, and let his fingers find the opening chords of Whiskey River, a Willie Nelson cover that would ease him into the night. His voice was rough velvet, worn smooth by too many late nights and too many cigarettes, but it carried well in the close confines of the bar. The conversations didn't stop, but they got quieter, and he could feel the attention settling on him like dust on a windowsill. He moved through the standards, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, some Chris Stapleton for the younger crowd. Songs about heartbreak and hard times, about roads not taken and bridges burned. The kind of music that spoke to people who understood that life was more about endurance than happiness. But as the night wore on, Marcus found himself watching the woman at the end of the bar. She'd ordered another beer but still hadn't touched the first one. Her eyes never left him, and there was something in her gaze that made his skin prickle with an awareness he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. During his break, he made his way to the bar. Betty was pulling beers with mechanical efficiency, but she tilted her head toward the woman when she saw him coming. "That's Luna Vasquez," she said quietly. "Librarian. Moved here about 6 months ago from back east somewhere. Keeps to herself mostly." Luna. The name felt right in his mouth, like a word he'd been searching for without knowing it. He ordered another whiskey and found himself standing just close enough to catch the scent of her perfume. Something light and floral that seemed out of place among the beer and cigarette smoke. "You're not from around here," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to reach her over the ambient noise of the bar. She turned, and up close he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the way her lower lip was slightly fuller than the upper one. "Neither are you," she replied, her voice softer than he'd expected. There was an accent there, something northern. "Boston maybe, or New York. I'm just passing through. Always am." He raised his glass in a small salute. "Marcus." "Luna." She didn't offer her hand, but she didn't look away either. "You play beautifully. Your voice is..." She paused, searching for the word. "Haunting." Something in the way she said it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Most people called his voice soulful or bluesy or rough around the edges. Haunting suggested she heard something deeper, something he tried very hard to keep buried. "Music's supposed to move people," he said carefully. "That's the point." "Is it?" Luna tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him want to step back. "I thought it was supposed to tell stories. Share truth." Before Marcus could answer, Betty was tapping the bar with a bottle opener. "You're on again in 5, Thorn." He nodded and started to turn away, but Luna's voice stopped him. "Will you play something different? Something that's just yours?" The request hit him like a physical blow. His own songs were dangerous territory, too close to what he really was, too likely to reveal the truth he'd spent 3 years running from. But something in her eyes, a hunger, a longing he recognized, made him nod before he could think better of it. "One song," he said. "Just one." Back on the stage, Marcus settled onto the stool and closed his eyes for a moment. The bar had grown quieter as the night deepened, the hard drinkers settling into their cups, the casual crowd having wandered home to their lives and their beds. This was the dangerous time, when the walls came down and the music could get too honest. His fingers found the chords without conscious thought, a melody he'd written in the depths of winter 3 years ago, when he'd still been trying to understand what he'd become. The song had no title, he'd never dared name it, but it spoke of running beneath starlight, of hunting dreams through moonlit forests, of the terrible freedom that came with abandoning everything you thought you were. When he started to sing, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the room to lean in, to listen. "Wild winds calling through the pines, ancient blood in modern veins, can't outrun what's in your bones, can't escape what still remains." The words weren't literal. He'd learned to hide truth in metaphor, to speak in symbols that only others like him would fully understand. But as the song built, as his voice climbed and soared, something shifted in the room. The air grew thick, electric, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the humid desert night. He could feel Luna watching him, her attention like a weight on his skin. But it was more than that. Something was responding to his song, something wild and hungry and long suppressed. He could smell it now, beneath the beer and smoke, the scent of earth and rain and wild places, the scent of change. His eyes snapped open and found Luna immediately. She was gripping the edge of the bar so hard her knuckles had gone white, her breath coming fast and shallow. Her pupils were dilated, almost swallowing the green of her irises, and when she looked at him, he saw his own recognition reflected back. She didn't know. Whatever was stirring inside her, whatever his song was awakening, she had no idea what it meant. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She was like him, but she'd never been told, never been taught, never been prepared. Marcus stumbled over the next verse, his fingers suddenly clumsy on the frets. He forced himself to finish the song, to bring it to its haunting conclusion, but his mind was racing. In 3 years of running, he'd never encountered another of his kind. He'd begun to believe he might be the only one left, the sole survivor of something the modern world had no place for. But Luna Vasquez was changing right in front of him, awakening to something she didn't understand, and he was the catalyst. His song had called to the wolf sleeping in her blood, and now there would be no putting it back to sleep. The last chord faded into silence so complete it seemed to ring in his ears. Then someone near the back started clapping, slowly, and the spell broke. The rest of the crowd joined in, but the applause felt distant, unreal. All Marcus could see was Luna pushing away from the bar, her face pale as moonlight, her hands shaking as she fumbled for money to pay her tab. She was running. He recognized the panic in her movements, the desperate need to escape before something inside her broke free. 3 years ago, he'd looked exactly the same. Marcus set his guitar aside and stepped off the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for tonight," he called out, his voice carrying despite the growing murmur of conversation. "Thank you for listening." Betty frowned at him from behind the bar. "You've got another hour on the clock, Thorne." "Emergency," he said, already moving toward the door. "Family thing." He caught Luna just as she reached her car, an aging Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better years. She had her keys out but her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get them in the lock. "Luna." His voice was gentle, but she spun around like he'd shouted, her back pressed against the driver's door. In the parking lot's harsh fluorescent light, he could see the fear in her eyes, but underneath it was something else. Something wild and desperate and utterly lost. "Stay away from me," she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "I don't know what you did, but I can't. I need to go home." "You can't drive like this." Marcus stopped a few feet away, his hands visible, non-threatening. He'd learned the hard way how to approach someone in the throes of their first change. "Let me help." "Help?" Luna laughed, but it came out high and brittle. "Help with what? I don't even know what's happening to me. I feel like my skin is too small, like there's something inside me trying to claw its way out." "What did you do to me?" The anguish in her voice hit him like a physical blow. He'd done this to her, awakened something she wasn't prepared for, wasn't equipped to handle. The responsible thing would be to walk away, let her figure it out on her own, just like he had. But looking at her now, terrified and alone and completely unprepared, he knew he couldn't abandon her to face this alone. "You're not going crazy," he said quietly. "And you're not sick. What you're feeling, it's real, and it's not your fault." "Then what is it?" Her voice cracked on the question. Marcus glanced around the parking lot, but they were alone. The music from inside the bar had stopped, replaced by the low murmur of closing-time conversations. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound carrying across the desert like an echo of something long forgotten. "Get in my truck," he said, nodding toward the battered Ford pickup he'd bought in Tucson 2 months ago. We need to talk, and this isn't the place. I'm not going anywhere with you. But even as she said it, her resolve was cracking. Another wave of whatever was happening inside her made her gasp and double over, one hand pressed to her stomach. Luna. He moved closer, slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I know what this is because it happened to me too. 3 years ago, I was just like you. Confused, scared, convinced I was losing my mind. But I didn't have anyone to explain it to me. I had to figure it out alone, and it nearly killed me. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. What are you talking about? Your bloodline, Marcus said simply. Something in your family tree that's been sleeping for generations, maybe centuries. My song woke it up. I'm sorry for that, I never meant for it to happen. But now that it has, you need to understand what you're becoming. Becoming? The word came out as barely a whisper. Marcus felt the familiar weight of the truth settling on his shoulders. He'd never told another living soul what he was, what he'd become that night 3 years ago when the change first took him. But Luna needed to know, needed to understand, and he was the only one who could tell her. Something the modern world says doesn't exist, he said. Something wild and ancient and beautiful and terrible. He paused, gathering his courage. Luna, you're becoming a werewolf. Chapter 2, Awakening. The word hung between them like a challenge to reality itself. Luna stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been relief. That's insane, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Werewolves aren't real. They're just stories. Legends. So are librarians who move to the middle of nowhere for no reason, Marcus replied gently. So are musicians who spend 3 years running from town to town, never staying long enough to form connections. He leaned against his truck, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. Tell me, Luna. What made you come to Sagebrush? What are you running from? She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, dreams. I've been having dreams for months. Of running through forests under a full moon, of hunting, something. I wake up exhausted, like I've been running all night. My sheets are muddy sometimes, and I live in a second-floor apartment. Marcus nodded. He remembered his own dreams, the way they'd intensified in the weeks before his first change. What else? Smells. Luna wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm night. Everything smells so strong now. I can tell what you had for dinner 3 hours ago. I know the bartender uses a different shampoo than she did last week. I can smell fear and anger and... She looked at him directly for the first time. I can smell something wild on you. Something that doesn't quite fit with the rest. Because I'm like you, Marcus said. Or like what you're becoming. But how is that possible? The question burst out of her, desperate and raw. My family is normal. My parents are accountants. My sister teaches kindergarten. There's nothing supernatural about us. It doesn't work that way. Marcus pushed away from the truck and moved closer, slowly, testing her reaction. She tensed but didn't flee. The bloodline can skip generations, sometimes centuries. It lies dormant until something triggers it, trauma, extreme stress, sometimes just the right alignment of moon phases and hormones. Or. He gestured between them. Sometimes it takes another of our kind to wake it up. Luna's legs gave out suddenly, and she slid down the side of her car until she was sitting on the asphalt. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Marcus crouched down in front of her, careful to stay at eye level, non-threatening. I know it's overwhelming. Trust me, I know. But fighting it will only make it worse. The change is going to happen whether you accept it or not. The only question is whether you'll have help learning to control it. Control what, exactly? Her voice was getting stronger, but he could hear the edge of panic still lurking underneath. The wolf. Marcus settled cross-legged on the gravel, ignoring the sharp stones digging into his jeans. That's what's stirring inside you. It's not a separate entity, it's part of you, part of who you've always been. But it's been sleeping, and now it's waking up. And you're saying you can help me with this wolf thing? I can teach you what I know. How to recognize the signs of a coming change, how to find safe places to transform, how to retain your human consciousness during the shift. Marcus paused, studying her face in the harsh parking lot light. But I should warn you, once you start down this path, there's no going back. Your old life, the normal human existence you've been living? That's over. Luna was quiet for a long time, processing his words. In the distance, music drifted from the bar as the last customers filtered out into the night. Someone laughed, the sound sharp and incongruous against the weight of their conversation. What if I don't want this? She asked finally. What if I just want to go back to my quiet life and my books and pretend this never happened? Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times over the past 3 years. You can try, he said honestly. Some people manage to suppress it for a while, maybe even years. But it always comes back stronger. And without proper guidance, without learning control. He shook his head. Luna, people can get hurt. Innocent people. The implication hit her like a slap. You're saying I might hurt someone? I'm saying you might not have a choice. The wolf doesn't understand human morality or human law. It operates on instinct, hunt, feed, protect, survive. If you don't learn to work with it, to integrate it into who you are, it will take over when you least expect it. Luna pushed herself back to her feet, pacing now in the small space between their vehicles. This is crazy. This whole conversation is insane. Is it? Marcus stood as well, watching her restless movement with growing concern. The energy rolling off her was becoming more agitated, more unstable. Or does it explain things? The dreams, the heightened senses, the feeling like you don't quite fit anywhere? The reason you left your old life and ended up here, in the middle of nowhere? She stopped pacing and stared at him. How did you know I left my old life? Because that's what we do, Marcus said softly. When the change starts, when the wolf begins to wake up, we run. We leave behind everything that doesn't fit with what we're becoming. Jobs, relationships, families, especially families. Because on some level, we know they wouldn't understand. Luna's face crumpled. I had a fiancé, she whispered. David. We were supposed to get married this fall. But I started having the dreams, and I couldn't explain what was happening to me. I couldn't even be in the same room with him without feeling like I was suffocating. Where is he now? Boston. Probably wondering why I disappeared without a real explanation. She laughed bitterly. I told him I needed space to figure things out. Classic commitment-phobe move, right? Except it wasn't about commitment. It was about survival. Marcus felt a familiar ache of recognition. He'd left behind a life too, a job as a high school music teacher, a small apartment he'd actually loved, a woman named Sarah who deserved better than his sudden, inexplicable withdrawal from their relationship. The wolf knew, he said. Even before you consciously understood what was happening, the wolf knew that your old life wouldn't survive the change. So it drove you away, somewhere safe, somewhere you could figure things out. Somewhere like Sagebrush, Nevada. Luna looked around at the dusty parking lot, the flickering neon signs, the vast darkness of the desert stretching away in all directions. God, what a place to have a supernatural crisis. Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. It could be worse. I had my first change in downtown Chicago. Try explaining mysterious disappearances and strange behavior when you're living in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls. Is that why you became a traveling musician? To hide what you are? Partly. Marcus leaned back against his truck, feeling some of the tension ease now that she was asking questions instead of running. It's easier to be a drifter when you need to disappear for 3 nights every month. And music helps. It's a way to channel what the wolf feels without losing control completely. The song you played tonight, Luna said suddenly. That wasn't just music, was it? It was calling. I could feel it in my bones. Marcus nodded grimly. That's why I don't usually play my own compositions. They're too honest, too close to what I really am. But you asked for something different, and I. He ran a hand through his dark hair. I should have known better. Should have realized there might be others out there who would respond to it. Others like us. Others like us, he confirmed. Luna was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Less panicked, more thoughtful. She was processing, weighing options, trying to make sense of a world that had just revealed itself to be far stranger than she'd ever imagined. If I let you help me, she said finally, what would that look like? First, we need to get you somewhere safe. The next full moon is in 2 weeks, and if this is going to be your first change, Marcus stopped, studying her face in the pale light. Luna, when's the last time you got a good night's sleep? I don't remember, she admitted. Maybe a week? The dreams are getting worse, and during the day I feel like there's electricity running just under my skin. Shit. Marcus pushed away from the truck, suddenly urgent. It's not going to wait for the full moon. You're too close already. The song tonight, The Awakening, it's accelerated everything. What does that mean? It means you're going to change soon. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow night. And if you're alone when it happens. Marcus moved to his truck and opened the driver's side door. Get in. We're leaving town. I can't just leave. I have a job, an apartment. Luna. His voice was sharp now, commanding in a way that made something inside her respond immediately. Your apartment is 2nd floor, right? When you change, you'll be operating on instinct. Wolves don't understand stairs or door handles or the concept of property damage. You could hurt yourself, or worse, you could hurt someone else. The authority in his voice, the certainty, cut through her remaining protests. Luna looked at her car, then at him, then at the bar where people were still filtering out into the night. Normal people with normal problems, heading home to normal lives. Where would we go? I know a place. About 50 miles north, up in the mountains. There's an old cabin, abandoned but structurally sound. No neighbors, no roads, just forest and wilderness. Marcus gentled his voice, sensing her wavering. Luna, I know this is asking a lot. I know you have no reason to trust me. But if I'm right about how close you are to changing, we don't have time for gradual acceptance. Luna stood frozen by her car, caught between the life she'd known and something vast and terrifying and completely unknown. Then another wave of whatever was building inside her hit, stronger this time, and she gasped, doubling over as pain lanced through her bones. Okay, she whispered when she could speak again. Okay, but I need to get some things from my apartment first. 5 minutes, Marcus said, already moving toward his truck. Pack light, just essentials. And Luna? Don't try to explain this to anyone. Don't call anyone. The fewer people who know where you've gone, the safer everyone will be. 20 minutes later, they were driving north on a 2-lane highway that cut through the desert like a scar, Luna's hastily packed duffel bag in the truck bed alongside Marcus's guitar and a collection of camping gear that suggested he'd done this before. She sat pressed against the passenger door, as far from him as she could manage, but he could smell her fear and confusion and the wild, electric scent of impending change. Tell me about your first time, she said as the lights of sagebrush disappeared behind them. What was it like? Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness ahead, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled at the rising moon. Terrifying, he said finally. I didn't know what was happening to me. Didn't have anyone to explain it or help me through it. I just woke up one morning naked in Lincoln Park with mud under my fingernails and the taste of raw rabbit in my mouth. Luna shuddered. Oh God. The worst part wasn't the physical transformation, Marcus continued. It was the knowledge. Suddenly understanding that everything I'd believed about the world, about the boundaries of what was possible, was wrong. Knowing that I was something the rational mind couldn't accept. How did you cope? I didn't, for a long time. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a psychotic break. Spent 3 months seeing psychiatrists and taking medications that did nothing but make me sick. It wasn't until the second change that I finally accepted what I'd become. The highway began to climb, winding up into foothills dotted with scrub pine and juniper. The air coming through the vents was cooler here, carrying scents of sage and stone and something wilder, more primitive. Marcus? Luna's voice was small in the darkness of the cab. What if I can't handle this? What if I'm not strong enough? He glanced at her, seeing the vulnerability in her profile, the way she held herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. You're stronger than you think, he said. You left your entire life behind when you felt the change coming. You drove across the country to find somewhere safe. That takes more strength than most people have. Or more cowardice. No. His voice was firm. Cowardice would have been staying, trying to pretend nothing was happening, letting other people pay the price for your transformation. You protected them even when you didn't understand what you were protecting them from. They drove in silence for another 20 minutes before Marcus turned off the highway onto a dirt road barely wide enough for the truck. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches scraping against the windows, and Luna caught glimpses of eyes reflecting in the headlights, deer, probably, or maybe coyotes, watching their passage with wild curiosity. The cabin sat in a small clearing, looking exactly as abandoned as Marcus had promised. The roof sagged slightly, and several windows were boarded up, but the structure looked solid enough. More importantly, it was isolated, surrounded by dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. Marcus parked beside the front porch and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, Luna could hear the wind moving through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and underneath it all, a rhythm that might have been her own heartbeat, or something else entirely. This is it, Marcus said, getting out and grabbing their bags from the truck bed. Home sweet home. Luna followed him up the creaking porch steps, every sense hyper-alert in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She could smell old wood and dust and something else, something wild and musky that made her skin prickle. Other wolves have been here, she said without thinking, then stopped, startled by her own certainty. Marcus paused in the act of unlocking the door and looked at her with something that might have been pride. Very good. Yes, this place has been used as a safe house for decades. Maybe longer. The door opened with a groan of protesting hinges, revealing a single room that was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by shelves that held oil lamps, matches, and what looked like emergency supplies. A simple wooden table sat beneath the room's only unboarded window, and in the corner, a narrow bed frame held a mattress that had seen better days but looked clean enough. It's not much, Marcus said, setting down their bags and moving to light one of the oil lamps. But it's isolated, and the walls are thick enough to muffle sounds. Luna stepped inside, her skin still prickling with awareness. The scents here were layered, old wood and dust, yes, but underneath that, the musk of wild animals, the metallic tang of blood, and something else that made her stomach clench with a hunger she didn't understand. How many others have been here? She asked, running her fingers along the rough-hewn table. She could almost feel the echoes of other presences, other transformations that had taken place within these walls. I don't know exactly. Dozens, maybe. This network of safe houses goes back generations. Places where people like us can change without endangering others. Marcus lit a second lamp, casting dancing shadows on the walls. There are marks on the doorframe, scratches where claws have gouged the wood. Each one represents someone who survived their first transformation. Luna moved to examine the doorframe and gasped. The wood was scored deeply, dozens of parallel lines carved by something with claws far larger and sharper than any normal animal. The marks overlapped and intersected, creating a chaotic pattern that spoke of desperation, of wild things trying to break free. Will I? She touched one of the deeper gouges, her finger tracing its length. Will I be like that? The first time is always the hardest, Marcus said gently. Your body doesn't know what it's doing yet, doesn't understand the process. There's pain, confusion, fear. But Luna, you need to understand, the wolf isn't your enemy. It's part of you. The more you fight it, the more violent the transformation becomes. As if summoned by his words, another wave of change swept through her, stronger than any that had come before. Luna doubled over, crying out as her bones felt like they were stretching, her muscles cramping and releasing in patterns that made no sense. Heat flooded through her body, followed by cold, and then a sensation like electricity crackling just beneath her skin. Marcus was beside her immediately, his hand steady on her shoulders. Breathe through it, he said, his voice calm despite the concern she could hear underneath. Don't fight it. Let it wash over you. It hurts, Luna gasped, tears streaming down her face. God, it hurts so much. I know. I know it does. But it's your body preparing, making room for what's coming. His hands moved to her face, cupping it gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. Luna, listen to me. It's going to happen tonight. The certainty in his voice cut through her pain. Tonight? But I thought you said. I was wrong. The awakening, the stress of the revelation, being here in a place saturated with our kind of energy, it's all accelerated the process. Marcus helped her to the narrow bed, easing her down onto the worn mattress. You have maybe an hour, maybe less. Terror flooded through her, sharp and bright. I'm not ready. I don't know how. You don't need to know how. Your body knows. The wolf knows. Marcus pulled a wooden chair close to the bed and sat down, his presence solid and reassuring in the lamplight. All you need to do is trust it. Luna curled into a ball on the bed, her whole body shaking. What will happen to me? Will I still be me? The first time, probably not completely. The wolf will be in control, driven by instinct and confusion. But you'll remember pieces of it, fragments. And each time after that, you'll retain more of yourself. Marcus reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently stroking her hair. The goal is integration, Luna. Learning to be both human and wolf, letting them exist together instead of fighting for control. Another wave hit her, this one accompanied by a sound she'd never made before, a low, guttural noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Her fingernails, she noticed with detached horror, were growing longer, darker, more curved. Marcus. Her voice was changing too, rougher, deeper. I'm scared. I know. But I'm going to be right here, okay? I'm not going anywhere. His voice was. I know. But I'm going to be right here, okay? I'm not going anywhere. His voice was steady, an anchor in the storm of sensation threatening to drown her. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to be yourself again. Different, but still you. The pain was building now, concentrated in her bones, her joints, places where her body would need to reshape itself to accommodate a new form. Luna gripped the edges of the mattress, her changing nails digging furrows in the fabric. Tell me about it, she managed to say between waves of agony. Tell me what it's like to be. What we are. Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. It's freedom, he said finally. Not the kind humans understand, not political freedom or social freedom, but something deeper. The freedom to be exactly what you are, without apology or explanation. When you're in wolf form, there are no lies, no masks, no pretending to be something you're not. But the hunting? She couldn't finish the sentence. Wolves hunt to survive, not for sport. And we retain enough human awareness to choose our prey carefully. Rabbits, deer, sometimes fish from mountain streams. Never humans, Luna. That's a choice, and it's one you'll always have the power to make. The transformation was accelerating now, her body temperature spiking as her metabolism changed to accommodate the shift. Luna felt her clothes growing tight as her frame began to expand, her muscles developing the power and bulk necessary for her new form. Should I? She gestured weakly at her sundress, now stretched uncomfortably across her changing body. Marcus nodded and turned away, giving her privacy. It's better to remove them now, while you still can. There's a blanket in the chest at the foot of the bed. Luna struggled out of her clothes with fingers that were becoming increasingly clumsy, her joints starting to reshape themselves. She pulled the rough wool blanket around her just as another massive wave of change swept through her body. This time, the pain was accompanied by a sound that was definitely not human, a howl that started low in her chest and built to something wild and primal and utterly alien. That's it, Marcus said, his back still turned to give her privacy. Let it out. Don't hold back. The howl seemed to release something inside her, some final barrier that had been holding the transformation at bay. Luna felt her spine elongating, her face pushing forward into something that was no longer quite human. Her teeth were sharpening, growing, and when she ran her tongue over them, she tasted blood from where they'd cut her lips. Marcus, she tried to say, but it came out as a whine, a sound of confusion and need. I'm here, he said immediately, turning back to her. If he was disturbed by what she was becoming, it didn't show in his face. You're doing great, Luna. Just let it happen. Her vision was changing too, colors shifting and intensifying, her perception of depth and movement becoming sharper, more acute. She could hear things now that had been inaudible before, the scurrying of mice in the walls, the heartbeat of some small animal outside the cabin, the whisper of wind through individual pine needles. And she could smell everything. The lamp oil, yes, but also the history of this place, every person who had ever been here, every transformation that had taken place within these walls. She could smell Marcus too, his human scent overlaid with something wild and canine, something that called to the creature she was becoming. The final stage of the transformation hit her like a physical blow, her body convulsing as the last of her human form dissolved into something entirely other. The pain reached a crescendo and then, suddenly, was gone, replaced by a sense of rightness, of completion, that was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Luna, though she wasn't sure that name applied anymore, opened eyes that saw the world in entirely new ways and looked at Marcus with an intelligence that was both human and utterly wild. He was smiling at her, his expression full of wonder and something that might have been pride. Hello, Luna, he said softly. Welcome to your new life. Chapter 3, First Hunt. Luna's awareness existed in layers now, human consciousness floating above wolf instinct like oil on water. She could feel both aspects of herself simultaneously, the Luna who worked in a library and missed her morning coffee, and something else, something ancient and hungry and magnificently alive. Her new body was a revelation. Powerful muscles coiled beneath silver-gray fur, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace she'd never possessed in human form. Her senses were almost overwhelming, she could hear Marcus's heartbeat, slow and steady, could smell the complex cocktail of his emotions, relief, protectiveness, and underneath it all, something wild that resonated with her own transformed nature. She tried to speak, to tell him how strange and wonderful this felt, but what came out was a soft whine that somehow conveyed more than words could have. Marcus understood immediately, sinking to his knees beside her transformed form. You're beautiful, he said, wonder evident in his voice. I've never seen a first transformation go so smoothly. Usually there's more. He gestured vaguely. Destruction. Luna patted carefully around the small cabin, testing her new body, learning how her changed proportions affected movement and balance. Everything felt different, the weight distribution, the way her spine curved, the power in her haunches when she moved. It should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like coming home to a body she'd never known she was missing. The hunger hit her suddenly, a gnawing emptiness that felt like starvation despite the fact that she'd eaten dinner just hours ago. But this wasn't human hunger for food, this was something deeper, more primal. The wolf wanted to hunt, needed to run and chase and bring down prey with her own teeth. She turned to Marcus, whining again, and he nodded as if he'd been expecting this. "The hunt," he said simply. "It's part of the process, especially for first-time changes. The wolf needs to fulfill its purpose, to prove itself." He moved to the door, opening it to reveal the forest beyond. "Are you ready?" Luna padded to the doorway and paused, overwhelmed by the symphony of scents that flooded her enhanced senses. The forest was alive in ways she'd never imagined, layers of animal trails, the musk of deer, the sharp scent of rabbit, the earthy richness of soil and decomposing leaves. Something rustled in the underbrush about 50 yards away, and her head snapped toward the sound with predatory focus. Her muscles coiled automatically, her body dropping into a hunting crouch she'd never learned but somehow knew perfectly. "Easy," Marcus said, his voice low and soothing. "Remember, you're still you. The wolf provides the instincts and the physical capability, but you choose how to use them." But the advice barely registered. The scent trail of the small animal, rabbit, her enhanced nose told her, was like a bright line leading into the forest, and every fiber of her being was focused on following it. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her paws silent on the forest floor. The hunt that followed was like nothing Luna had ever experienced. Her human mind rode along as passenger while wolf instincts guided her through the dark forest, her paws finding sure footing on ground she couldn't see, her nose tracking the scent trail with unerring accuracy. The rabbit was young, she realized as she drew closer, inexperienced enough to rely too heavily on stillness for protection. It crouched beneath a fallen log, heart hammering with fear, unaware that Luna could smell its terror from 30 feet away. When she struck, it was with the swift efficiency of a creature born to this work. The rabbit's brief struggle ended quickly, and as Luna felt its life fade beneath her jaws, something inside her, some last vestige of human squeamishness, recoiled. But the wolf felt only satisfaction, the deep contentment of a successful hunt. She carried her prize back to the cabin, where Marcus waited by the open door. He took in her bloodied muzzle and the limp form of the rabbit without flinching, understanding that this was part of what she needed to become whole. "How do you feel?" he asked as she settled on the cabin floor with her kill. Luna couldn't answer in words, but the low rumble that came from her chest spoke of satisfaction, of completion, of a fundamental need finally met. She was both horrified and exhilarated by what she'd done, her human consciousness struggling to process the wolf's simple pleasure in the hunt. Marcus seemed to understand her conflict. "The first kill is always the hardest to reconcile," he said gently. "But Luna, this is what you are now. Fighting it will only cause you pain." As the night deepened, Luna found herself changing back gradually, the wolf form dissolving slowly rather than all at once. It was less violent than the initial transformation, more like settling into a familiar chair than the violent reshaping she'd experienced earlier. By dawn, she was human again, naked and shivering on the cabin floor, the taste of blood still lingering in her mouth. Marcus wrapped her in blankets and helped her to the bed, his touch careful and respectful. "How do you feel?" he asked again, this time expecting a human answer. Luna considered the question seriously, taking inventory of her body and mind. She felt different, stronger, more aware, like she'd been living her entire life with dulled senses and had suddenly been given access to the full spectrum of human experience. "Alive," she said finally. "More alive than I've ever been." Chapter 4: Learning to be Whole. The weeks that followed became a masterclass in integration. Marcus proved to be a patient teacher, guiding Luna through the complexities of her new existence with the gentle authority of someone who understood the magnitude of what she was facing. During the day, he taught her meditation techniques to help recognize the early signs of an approaching change. He showed her breathing exercises that could delay a transformation if necessary, buying her precious time to find somewhere safe. Most importantly, he helped her understand that the wolf wasn't something to be conquered or suppressed. It was part of her that needed to be acknowledged and integrated. "The key is not to fight the wolf," he explained one afternoon as they sat on the cabin's front porch, watching clouds drift across the desert sky. "It's to learn to work with it. Think of it as negotiations between different aspects of yourself. It doesn't feel like negotiation, Luna said, flexing her fingers and watching her nails elongate slightly in response to her emotions. Even in human form now, she could feel the wolf just beneath the surface, a constant presence that colored everything she did. It feels like I'm sharing space with something that has very strong opinions about how things should be done. Marcus laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine in a way that made Luna's chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. That's exactly what it is. The wolf isn't wrong, Luna. Its instincts are usually sound, they're designed to keep you alive and healthy. The trick is learning when to listen and when to assert your human priorities. At night, they ran together through the forest. Marcus would change first, his transformation swift and practiced, and Luna would follow, her own shift becoming easier and more controlled with each attempt. In wolf form, they were magnificent together. Two creatures moving through the darkness with perfect synchronization, communicating through scent and body language and an understanding that transcended human speech. These runs became the highlight of Luna's existence. Running with Marcus, she began to understand what he'd meant about freedom. In wolf form, there were no social expectations, no need to pretend or perform. She was simply herself, predator and protector, wild and wise, part of something ancient and eternal. But it was the quiet moments afterward, when they'd returned to the cabin and changed back to human form, that Luna treasured most. Marcus would make coffee over the fireplace while she wrapped herself in blankets, and they would talk until dawn about everything and nothing. He told her about the places he'd been, the songs he'd written, the loneliness of 3 years spent running from what he was. She told him about her old life, her dreams that seemed smaller now, the books she missed from her job at the library. "Do you regret it?" she asked him one morning as the sun painted the cabin walls gold. "Giving up your normal life?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup like it might hold answers. "I regret the way it happened," he said finally. "I regret not having a choice, not understanding what was coming." "But the life itself?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes serious. "Luna, I've spent the last 3 years convinced I was the only one. That I was some kind of freak accident, a mistake that nature made. But finding you, helping you through this, it's the first time in years that I've felt like maybe I belong somewhere." The words hit Luna like a physical blow, resonating with feelings she'd been trying not to examine too closely. "Marcus." "I know," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're still figuring out who you are now, what you want your life to look like. I'm not asking for anything, Luna. I'm just grateful. For this time. For not being alone anymore." But Luna was beginning to realize that she didn't want him to be alone anymore either. Somewhere in the past few weeks, between the transformations and the hunts and the long conversations by lamplight, something had shifted. Marcus wasn't just her teacher anymore, or her protector. He was becoming something more precious and more dangerous, he was becoming home. Chapter 5, The Choice. The full moon came a month after Luna's first transformation, rising like a silver coin over the mountain peaks and filling the forest with ethereal light. Luna felt its pull from the moment the sun set, a tugging in her chest that made her skin feel too tight and her bones ache with anticipated change. "This will be different," Marcus warned her as they prepared to leave the cabin. "The full moon amplifies everything, the change comes faster, the instincts are stronger, and the wolf is more assertive." Luna nodded, checking the straps on the small pack she'd learned to carry during their runs. Inside were emergency supplies, water, basic first aid, and clothing for the morning after. "Will I still be able to control it?" "You'll have less control than usual, but you won't lose yourself completely." "Not anymore." Marcus shouldered his own pack and opened the cabin door, revealing the moonlit forest beyond. "The important thing is to remember that I'll be with you. No matter what the wolf wants to do, you won't be alone." The transformation under the full moon was unlike anything Luna had experienced before. It came like a tide, swift and overwhelming, carrying her human consciousness along rather than submerging it entirely. When she opened her wolf eyes and looked at Marcus, his own transformation complete, his dark gray form magnificent in the moonlight, she felt a connection that went beyond pack dynamics or shared nature. They ran that night like creatures possessed, covering miles of forest terrain with effortless speed. Luna felt the exhilaration of pure movement, the joy of muscles working in perfect harmony, the satisfaction of being exactly what she was meant to be. Under the full moon, she understood for the first time why Marcus had called this freedom. But it was what happened in the quiet hours before dawn, as they rested in a small clearing beneath the fading moon, that changed everything. In wolf form, they lay close together for warmth, and Luna could hear Marcus's heartbeat, steady and strong, could smell his scent mixed with pine and earth and wild things. The wolf part of her recognized him as more than pack, it recognized him as mate. When they changed back at sunrise, the recognition remained. Luna found herself looking at Marcus differently, seeing not just the man who had saved her from facing this transformation alone, but the person she wanted to face everything else with too. "Marcus," she said as they dressed in the pre-dawn light, "I need to tell you something." He paused in pulling on his shirt, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Luna, if this is about last night." "It's not about the wolf," she interrupted. "Or maybe it is, partly. But it's about me too. The human me." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't want to go back to my old life. Not just because I can't, but because I don't want to." Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I feel like I know who I am. Not the Luna who was trying to fit into a life that was too small for her, but all of me. Human and wolf, civilized and wild, all the contradictions that make me whole." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the hope beginning to dawn in his dark eyes. "And I'm saying that I want to figure out what this new life looks like with you." For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. Then he reached out, cupping her face in his hands with a gentleness that made her heart race. "Luna, are you sure? Because once we go down this path, once we stop running and start building something together." "I'm sure," she said, and she was. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." When he kissed her, it was like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. It was the taste of coffee by lamplight and the wild freedom of moonlit runs. It was the promise of a life lived fully, without apology or compromise. Chapter 6, Building a Pack. They left the cabin 3 days later, but not to run to another town, another temporary refuge. Instead, they drove south, toward a small city in New Mexico where Marcus had heard rumors of others like them, a community that had found ways to live openly as what they were, supporting each other through the challenges of their dual nature. "It might not be what we're hoping for," Marcus warned as they loaded their few possessions into his truck. "The rumors could be wrong, or exaggerated, or—" "Then we'll figure something else out," Luna said, settling into the passenger seat with a confidence that surprised her. "But Marcus, I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of treating what we are like it's something shameful." The community they found in Taos was everything they'd hoped for and more. Nestled in the mountains outside the artist colony, it was a place where werewolves and humans lived side by side, where children grew up knowing exactly what they were and how to handle it safely. There were teachers like Marcus had been, artists and craftspeople, doctors and engineers, people who had found ways to integrate their dual nature into meaningful, productive lives. "We call ourselves the Mountain Pack," explained Elena Rodriguez, the community's unofficial leader, as she showed them around. "Not because we're all one big pack, that would be a disaster with this many alphas, but because we're a community of packs. Families, couples, individuals who've chosen to build something together rather than face this alone." Luna felt something settle in her chest as Elena spoke, a peace she hadn't realized she'd been seeking. This was what she'd been unconsciously searching for when she'd fled Boston, not just a place to hide, but a place to belong. Within a week, they'd rented a small house on the community's outskirts, close enough to benefit from the support system but far enough away to have privacy for their own pack of two. Marcus found work teaching music at the community school, his songs finally able to be honest about the wildness that inspired them. Luna started a small library, cataloging the community's oral histories and helping maintain the records that kept track of bloodlines and safe houses across the country. But it was the music they made together that truly announced their arrival. On their first full moon as residents, they performed at the community's monthly gathering, Marcus on guitar, Luna's voice weaving harmonies that spoke of freedom and belonging, of the courage to be exactly what you were meant to be. "I've never heard anything like that," Elena told them afterward. "It's like you took everything we feel about who we are and turned it into song." "That's exactly what we did," Luna replied, her hand finding Marcus's across the space between them. "It's the song of not running anymore." Epilogue: The Lone Wolf's New Song. 2 years later. The Moonrise Saloon looked exactly the same as it had the night Marcus first played there: flickering neon sign, gravel parking lot, the same mix of hope and desperation hanging in the air like cigarette smoke. But as Marcus pushed through the heavy wooden doors with Luna beside him, everything felt different. They were back in Sagebrush for a reason. Word had reached them through the network of safe houses and community contacts that another werewolf had surfaced here, someone new, someone frightened and alone, someone who needed what they could offer. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked Luna as they approached the bar. He carried his guitar case in one hand, her hand in the other, and his voice held the gentle concern that had become as familiar to her as breathing. "Completely," Luna replied, and she was. "Everyone deserves what we found, Marcus. No one should have to face this alone." Betty Kowalski looked up from behind the bar, her expression shifting from suspicion to recognition to something that might have been approval. "Well, I'll be damned. Marcus Thorne, back in my establishment. And this time you brought company. Betty, this is Luna. My wife." The word still sent a thrill through him, even after 6 months of marriage. "We heard you might have need of some musicians tonight." Betty's eyes narrowed slightly, but not with hostility, with understanding. In the 2 years since Marcus had left Sagebrush so suddenly, she'd put together enough pieces to guess at some version of the truth. She was a bartender in a small desert town. She'd learned to ask few questions and offer sanctuary when it was needed. "There's a young man been coming in the last few nights," she said quietly, nodding toward a corner booth where a figure sat hunched over a beer he wasn't drinking. "Name's Danny. Moved here from Phoenix last week, says he's having trouble sleeping. Won't talk to anyone, but he's been watching that stage like he's waiting for something." Marcus followed her gaze and saw what Betty meant immediately. The young man, barely more than a teenager, had the same desperate, haunted look Marcus remembered seeing in his own reflection 3 years ago. The same look Luna had worn that first night, when his song had called to the wolf sleeping in her blood. "We'll take care of it," Luna said softly, and the certainty in her voice made something warm unfold in Marcus's chest. His Luna, who had been so terrified of what she was becoming, now stood ready to guide another through the same transformation. They took the stage without fanfare, Marcus tuning his guitar while Luna adjusted the microphone. The bar was fuller than it had been that first night, but the audience felt the same, people looking for something they couldn't name, hoping for a moment of connection in the vast loneliness of the desert. "Good evening, Sagebrush," Marcus said into the mic, his voice carrying easily across the room. "We'd like to start tonight with a song about finding your way home." He began to play, but this wasn't the desperate, searching melody he'd performed 2 years ago. This was something new, something that spoke of journeys completed rather than begun, of questions answered rather than asked. When Luna joined in, her voice harmonizing with his, the song became about more than one person's transformation. It became about community, about belonging, about the courage to be exactly who you were meant to be. As they sang, Marcus watched the young man in the corner booth. Danny's head had come up at the first notes, his eyes wide with recognition and desperate hope. By the time they reached the chorus, "Come home to yourself, come home to your pack, the moon's calling you home at last," tears were streaming down the boy's face. After the set, Danny approached them with the same hesitant desperation Luna had shown that first night. "That song," he whispered, "it was like you were singing directly to me. Like you knew." We do know, Luna said gently, her voice carrying all the compassion of someone who had walked this path before. And we're here to help. 3 hours later, they sat in an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, explaining to Danny the same truths Marcus had shared with Luna in this very parking lot 2 years before. The young man listened with the desperate attention of someone finally hearing words that made sense of his world. So there are others? Danny asked, hope bright in his eyes. I'm not the only one? You're not alone, Marcus assured him. There's a whole community of people like us, people who've learned to build lives around what we are instead of in spite of it. If you want, we can take you there. Introduce you to others who can help you learn control, find your place. But what about my life here? My job, my apartment. Luna and Marcus exchanged a look full of shared understanding. The life you're living now, Luna said gently, is it really your life? Or is it just a costume you're wearing because you think you're supposed to? Danny was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was stronger. When can we leave? As they drove north from Sagebrush the next morning, 3 people instead of 2, Marcus caught Luna's eye in the rearview mirror. She was sitting in the back seat with Danny, answering his endless questions about transformation and community and what it meant to live as both human and wolf. No regrets? Marcus asked softly, the question meant for both of them. Luna smiled, the expression radiant in the morning light. Only that it took us so long to find each other. Behind them, the desert stretched away toward the horizon, vast and empty and full of possibility. Ahead lay mountains and forests and a community that had learned the secret of being whole. And in the truck, 3 voices joined together in harmony, singing the song of people who had finally come home to themselves. Marcus was no longer the lone wolf, drifting from town to town with only his music for company. Luna was no longer the frightened librarian, running from dreams she couldn't understand. They were pack now, family, a note of belonging in the great symphony of those who had learned to embrace both their wild nature and their human hearts. The road stretched ahead, leading home. The end. If you want to hear more like this, remember to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for listening.